Hello, I'm Paul Race, and welcome to my workshop. Today I'm going to try to finish a project I started the other day. I was actually halfway in the middle of it, and I thought, you know what I should do is I should record this for posterity. Even though it's a project very few people will ever get involved in. You may hear about this particular Autoharp. It's famous for its bad design, and I just thought I would show you what is going into it, what went into the design of the thing, and why it's failing, and let you know if you come across one. Yeah, there's a lot of good parts in it, but other than that, it's not likely to be reparable. First of all, I need you to understand I've been researching Autoharps from the 1890s on for a very long time, and I've come across all kinds of bizarre ones. But in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there was a rash of experimentations with Autoharps. There were Autoharps that you would hold like a guitar. There were electric Autoharps. There was an Autoharp called the Caroler that's too big to hold, and it was made to be played for churches and places like that that couldn't afford a piano. There are all kinds of crazy things. And one of the least crazy was actually clever in its own way, although it didn't quite hit the market the way they hoped it would. And it was called the OS45. And this came out in the mid-60s during the folk revival when everybody was playing guitars and banjos. And Autoharps in those days typically did not play the keys that were the favorite of banjo and guitar players, especially they really sucked at playing the key of D. So what Peterson did when he first got involved with the Autoharp company was he went to several folk singers and country players and even Mother Maybelle Carter, who had been famous for playing the Autoharp, and said, what could I do to make the Autoharp more useful for people playing your genres of music? And so most specifically, they changed the keys so that you have out on the end here where they've been known to put other keys, they put E, A, and D, and that way you could play a song in the key of A, which you couldn't on any other Autoharp. It's still almost impossible to play a song in D because the G's all the way over here, and you wind up with carpal tunnel if you do it too much. I have taken these and just literally moved the chord bars around a little and made them a whole lot more playable than they are now. But nevertheless, it was a good attempt to make an Autoharp that could be played by folk and bluegrass and country players without having to change all the songs to the key of E flat or something. It was called the OS45. Two versions of this were made, and then Autoharp was in the midst of redesigning their entire line, and they came up with the Model B, which looked like this. You'll notice this is the shape of modern Autoharp since about 1969. But in this case, the first iteration of the Appalachians in this style maintained the key structure of the old 15-chord Appalachians that I just showed you. You see the E, A, and D out on the end there. So these are handy instruments, especially if you jam with guitar players. They don't have all the chords you need to play a lot of folk music. As a result, a lot of people just pass them by. I find them very easy to reconfigure, and I enjoy using them. But when Peterson started making 21 quarters, the folk movement had pretty much died down, and the bluegrass bands had never really taken up to playing the Autoharp and so on. And so it was easier for them when they made the 21 chord Appalachian to give you the same 21 chords as all the other 21 chorders. I'm going to show you a standard 21 chorder. This is an OS45CE, but I just to show you the chords that are on it. You can see that the E major is missing. You can play songs in D, you can play songs in A, but it's not made to place you don't have the E major on. And it was really no different than buying any other 21 chord Autoharp. Well, wait a second. The OS45, the old OS45s were considered premium among the 15 chord family. So how do you make the new OS45s premium, even though they have the same old chord structure and there's nothing new about them really? Well, how you do it is you replace this hole with a hole that looks like a flower, and it's really pretty. And you put a natural face on it, and you put binding on it, and it looks like an upscale instrument. I'm going to set this down and show you what I have, what's left of that instrument. So the OS45 migrated to this appearance with a flower cutout, and for years, I mean, I'm talking up to about 2019, the Oscar Schmidt company was claiming that it was ideal for bluegrass, even though the only difference between this and the one I showed you, the entry-level 21-quarter I showed you, the only significant difference was the flower cutout. Now, this particular one also had a pickup, it had an equalizer, it had fine-tuning system on it, it had a little tuner that went up here, and I started taking it apart and for parts because, as you can see, it is not salvageable. The face is just too warped to be of any use. The fellow who sold it to me warned me of that, and I thought, nah, I can fix it. And the other thing that I need to share with you is, preemptively, I wanted to explain that sometimes Autoharps are just too far gone. And this sounds like a silly thing to have to say, but I've accumulated a lot of oddball Autoharps, including Autoharps that were top of the line in their time and had other fatal flaws similar to this one. And typically, I participate in any number of Autoharp circles, especially online conversation groups and so on. And I'll ask people, do you want this? It's salvageable, but it's going to take some work. Does anybody out there want this? I'll send it to you for the cost of shipping. And typically, nobody responds. But the funny thing is, when I say, okay, I'm going to give it to Goodwill or sell it for $10 for somebody that can use for parts or whatever, and they're just absolutely free. You can't do that to a Centurion. You can't do that to a whatever model of Autoharp. It's like, okay, if it's special to you and it really bothers you that I'm not going to put $300 into an Autoharp and wind up with a $150 Autoharp at the end, then you do it. And nobody wants to. So I actually turned a Centurion, which was a dynamite Autoharp in its day, but had facial warping almost as bad as this. I turned it back to Goodwill and let somebody else worry about it. So this one is too far gone. I wouldn't do anybody with this particular one because, as you can see from the face, it is so warped. So what I started to do in my workshop here is I took off the chord bar cover, I took off the chord bars, and then I thought, oh, I should be doing a video of this, even though it's not the world's most exciting video because I'm not fixing anything. I am just literally scavenging for parts. Nevertheless, you may find yourself in a position where you have something similar to this, and it's like, can I really reuse this part? Can I really reuse that part? Well, I'm just going to show you, yes, you can. What I am holding here is an Autoharp that at some point in time, somebody over-engineered it by putting a wonderful equalizer on the side and a pickup under the strings. There's nothing wrong with the pickup under the strings, but in order to fit the equalizer into the side, they had to carve into the framework of the Autoharp, and as a result, you can see that it has warped. Some of these have warped so badly that they have actually folded in half. This is technically a OS45CE. I love 45s in general. They were originally considered Appalachians and actually had different chords than regular Autoharps back when they were first invented in the 60s. This one is has a standard chord layout of any other 21 chord Autoharp. And the difference is, well, it's supposedly a premium, and it had the pickups. It also had tuning guide up here. That's just a little tiny thing to tell you whether you are in tune. What's wrong with this picture is that there's no way to repair these. So what I'm doing here is a post-mortem on them. Now, as you take these combs off, one thing to keep in mind is there are these two little flanges that hold the end of the chord bar on. So you want to not lose those. They're held on by the same screws that hold on the combs. So as I bring out the combs, which again, I'm just trying to not lose too many of the springs as I do this. You can order new springs. It's not a hardship. If you lose one, then I make sure that I have the little flanges as well. Now that I have the comb off, you can see that the pickup is just one big long magnetic strip. Nothing wrong with that. It picks up the whole range of the instrument. The ones that you buy as a third party typically are shaped a little different. They may go down at an angle or something like this. This one is unique to this setup. I have enough sense to never try to put this on another Autoharp because I'll break it too. But I'm hoping that I can use the pickup by itself in a future project. So I'm going to take it off. Unlike the add-on pickups that you can buy from companies like Daigle Autoharps, this one is actually screwed to the face of the Autoharp. I'm not going to say that that was a good plan, but it's the way they did it. So in a minute, I'll have these screws off and I'll get to the next part of this. While I was away from you, I also loosened the strings at about 1.5 turns on each one. I'll eventually take them all off, but it was hard to get to some of the little screws with those strings in place. So as I noticed something crazy as I was loosening these screws. The screws are definitely long enough to go into the face of the instrument. So it wasn't until I loosened the screws that I was able to begin loosening the pickup and having it come away from the face of the instrument a little bit. That said, the pickup is also coming apart. So I may or may not have a pickup when I'm done with this. As I loosen these screws, one thing that I can see is a set of little copper wires underneath this top part, and they're kind of leaking out to the side. So I'm hoping that as I do what it takes to loosen this, I'm not actually getting the poor pickup beyond a state of usefulness. A new pickup from Daigle, as I record this, is a little over $100. And this, as I said, may not be salvageable at all, but we're going to do what we can. I noticed that even though the screws are definitely holding this magnetic pickup into the face of the instrument that begins to come loose as I loosen those screws, the pickup itself is also coming apart, and there's a whole bunch of little wires underneath here that are kind of sneaking out the side. So I'll have to be careful when I remove it to see if I can actually get that back and get that part of it working. The electronics are being on this end. I'm going to go ahead. This obviously isn't going to go anywhere until I do something with the electronics. So I'm going to take the electronics off. There's little screws, 4 little screws around the side. I already took the tuner out. It looked to me like just a little plug tuner that they have on a lot of instruments today. It actually was a circuit board. So the part that you could see was this part. But underneath that, back into the Autoharp, was this long piece that was connected by a little wire to the rest of the electronics, which is good because that means that the tuning that you did wasn't just picking up vibrations from the face of the instrument, it was actually picking up from the pickup. That actually makes for a better tuning situation. I have been in too many situations with too many instruments where I had a snark or something that would pick up the vibrations of my instrument and the tune, and ordinarily you think, oh, that's great because it doesn't matter what's going on. But the people behind me were playing so loudly that my instrument that I'm playing, and the vibrations is actually picking up the vibrations of their guitars and amps, and I still couldn't tune my instrument. So having the tuner hardwired to electronics to the mag pickup is a good thing. I had the 4 screws loosened that were holding the equalizer to the side of the Autoharp, and I'm going to see what it would take to pull this up and out of here. It may take some work. Worst thing that could happen is that I damage an irreparable Autoharp beyond repair. I'm not sure that's something I need to be particularly afraid of. As I look in here, try to figure out what is holding. Oh, it's coming out one end. Okay, look at that. Look at that. As I look into the gap where this was, I'm seeing little wires coming out of the preamp / equalizer. And it's really obvious that this wire is going to the pickup. So if I just wanted to use a pickup and I can get it off without destroying it, then this gives me the 2 wires that I need to wire to use a pickup in the future. That said, There are other wires that were connecting to the tuner, and those won't be hard to figure out. And then there are going to be wires connecting to the output. This was a powered unit, and there's a little battery in here that I should be able to just pop out. But obviously some of the wires that are coming off of this also went to the 9-volt battery. So I'm going to take this battery compartment off as well. The electrical engineering on this was really very clever. The wires from the preamp that go to the battery actually go to a little battery connector type thing that you would ordinarily see a 9-volt plugging directly into. So that actually can come off. And the other thing that the battery is driving is it's driving the wires that went to the little tuner. So actually that's not a bad setup. They were very, very clever. The British have a saying, too clever by half, which is to say you do everything right at one level, but there are things you haven't taken into account. I'm going to keep the battery compartment separate like that. My guess is that the rest of the wires are just going to pull out, except for the wire that goes to the pickup, because that's going to be solid. Okay, here's the wire that went to the battery. Oh, the wires that go to the jack will still be attached. So I'll need to loosen the jack. Question is, will the whole jack come loose, or is this fancy plate concealing other issues? So I'm taking the jack off. See if that's going to let me pull it separate. Oh, I'm pulling it right out. Okay. Hang on, I'm going to save that washer. Okay. Look at that. Almost got the jack out. Oh, there's a big round hole here. And here comes the jack. I like that. That's nice. That's handy. Once I said the electrical engineering on these was very clever. I'm going to go ahead and save this too. You never know when it might come in handy. So I screw the little hex-shaped nut back on there and the washer. Okay, so now I have the preamp. Well, one other wire going someplace where I don't think it should. And by the way, while I was doing all that fiddling around, the pickup itself disconnected itself from the preamp. Let me show you that. The pickup, turns out, just has a actual little tiny plug on the end. I don't know how easy it is to see that, but the pickup actually also comes out easily. So there's one little wire that's still connected to something in here, and I'm wondering if it's a ground wire that's just connected to the jack or the bridge or something in this harp. I'm not too concerned about it, since I know now I can get the pickup. Look, it's even coming loose. I can get the pickup off of here. I've got the rest of the electronics. Whatever this goes to, flashlight time. Well, maybe when I take a couple of these other pieces off, it'll be more obvious where that goes. I'll leave that on there for now. It's not that big a hassle to have it. I've loosened the strings quite a bit more, and it's given me enough room to start sliding this pickup out. Now that I've moved the pickup over, you can see there's a little hole that they fed that little plug through. So one question I had was, will I be able to use this pickup on another instrument? I think that's partially going to depend on whether I can get it back together. You see all the little wires coming out both sides. So it'll take a little testing to be sure I can use it. So the pickup itself should just be a magnetic pickup similar to what they have on electric guitars. And I should be able to just get the right ends on it and everything else and plug it into a guitar amp and have it work. So that's one thing I was interested in discovering. Now I'm going to set the pickup over here. Again, the preamp is still attached by one little wire. So I'm thinking it's probably attached to the bridge down here, or possibly to something on the fine tuner arrangement. So I'm going to take a look at that next. Little screws here, we'll take that part off and we'll see what we have. Well, I've taken the bridge plate cover off. That's the piece that hides the base where the strings go through. On a regular Autoharp, this part is aluminum and it's a single piece, and the strings just clip into it, and this covers the end of the strings. On an Autoharp with fine tuners, things are a little bit more complicated. Now I've shown you how I dissected this. I still have one wire, and I believe that it's connecting to the anchor inside here. I still have one wire that's connecting the electronics. The pickup itself is completely loose from the Autoharp, and there's a little plug, so it wouldn't be hard for me to figure out how to wire that into a jack or something on a subsequent instrument. But once again, with this so far gone, it's worth more for parts, literally. Not that I sell parts or even buy them as a rule, but it's worth more for parts than it is for any other reason. So I'm going to turn the camera back down here and let you see what the next step of this is going to be. And that is taking out these fine tuners. Now, each of these fine tuners is actually two parts. It's a screw that screws into a little lever sort of thing that Autoharp people call cams. There's the screw and the cam. Here's the screw and here's the cam. So the screw goes into the cam, and the end of the string goes into the end of the cam, or the back of the cam, like so. And then once you get it settled in there, which it's hard to do once you've pulled it out again, but once you get that settled in there, you stick it down in here and you find the screw point and you screw that screw back in. It takes a 2.5 millimeter Allen wrench to do this. Now, how do I get this off of here? Well, since I'm not going to be able to salvage these strings anyway, I get it off by just cutting the string and pulling it out. That's something that my friend Pete Daigle told me to do, and I just wanted to be sure. I contacted him before I did this because I wanted to be absolutely certain I wasn't just lying to you. So this part will screw down into a black anchor that you can't really see, and the string goes up through here, and then this raises and lowers as you adjust it with the Allen wrench, which gives hopefully micro adjustments to the pitch. Now, the problem with the Oscar Schmidt fine tuners is that the cam rises and falls. Other fine tuners that are made by other companies, Schreiber for one, do not do that in the same way. So you can see as the cam rises and falls, the strings are going to wind up being at different heights. So when you use a fine tuner of an Oscar Schmidt, the first thing that you do is you level them out, make sure they're completely level. Tune the harp as close as you can possibly get it here. And from that point on, any adjustments you make should just be very minor. That way you'll avoid the problem of these cams sitting higher or lower. And if you do that, some of the strings will be harder to mute because they're farther from the chord bar. But there's all kinds of reasons why you don't want these sitting at all different levels. And the Oscar Schmidt will let you do that if you're careless and depend on the fine tuners the way first-year violin students depend on their fine tuners. Okay, so that's the second one coming out, and so on. I'm not going to bother showing you every one of these that I pull out, but that's the mechanism. And underneath these, there is a steel bar that runs across and that they screw into, and that's the anchor bar for this particular Autoharp. As you can see, I'm down to just a handful of these. The screw floats freely in the cam, so they will come separate. I like to kind of keep them together. It's a sanity thing. The screw and this, I could take the screw completely out of the cam since the cam doesn't have any threads in it. It's just pass through for the screw. That said, I try to keep them together. I have almost finished with this part, but I wanted to share something about fine tuners. Why are there fine tuners on Autoharps? And the answer is that especially for somebody who's a professional or is going to be going to a recording studio and want things to be exactly correct. These things don't always get you exactly where you need to be. Frequently, I discover that tiny bit of pressure to tighten it makes it too sharp, and then an equal amount, tiny bit of pressure to loosen it makes it just slightly flat. Now, in ordinary playing conditions, if I'm going to take an Autoharp to a hootenanny or a jam or something like that, ordinarily that doesn't bother anybody because we all grew up tuning by ear, and it doesn't really freak us out if something's a couple cents off. But if somebody is going into the recording studio with one of these, they want to be darn certain that the instrument is as in tune as it possibly can be. And the other aspect of that has to do with the people who like to rework their Autoharps to something called diatonic, where, just for instance, 99% of what you play is in the key of G, or sometimes in the key of D. Well, in the key of G, you can use chords. Typically, you'll use C, D, A, or A7, A minor, E minor, perhaps B minor, and so on. In the key of D, you might use F sharp minor. So there's a handful of chords, maybe 15, that the average person uses if they're only ever playing in the key of D or G. And so what people will do, they'll remove those other chords like A flat that they're on B flat that they're never going to use, and then they take the strings that those chords use that don't fit into the C, G, D, A, E spectrum that I just described, and they will tune those strings down or up so that they are the same exact tone as one of the strings they're leaving. So for instance, if I'm never going to need a B flat note ever in the music I play on this particular harp, I can take the B flat and I can tune it down to A, and that way all the chords that use an A, the A will sound twice, and it'll make it louder and a richer sound like a 12-string guitar. Other strings that are typically tuned down, the E flat string, there's a lot of Autoharps that the way they're designed don't actually ever play the E flat string. Now the modern ones all do. If you're never going to play the note E flat, then why not take that string and tune it down to D, and that way whenever you play the D chord, then you've got that doubled and it's a richer sound. What about G? Well, G sharp is used by the key of E, but if you're never going to actually need an actual E chord, you could theoretically, if what you really need is E minor and E7, you could fake the E7 by not having the third in there, tuning that G sharp note down to G, and just leaving the third out of your E7 chord, and nobody will notice. I hate to say it, but I've been cursed for saying that by people who know a lot about music, and maybe even more than I do, and know a lot about Autoharps, and say, well, if you take that G7 out of your E chord, then you're stripping out of your E7 chord, and you're stripping the Autoharp of one of its best sounds. Well, the problem with that is if I'm playing songs that never use E7, and I can substitute an E7 with no third for E7, and then I can take that G sharp key and tune it down to G, then I've doubled G, D, and A, and every chord I play in the key of D will have doubled notes. Some people do other things to double. If I'm never going to use an F note, I might tune that down to E, and then my A chord will have two notes doubled. My C chord will have one note doubled, and so on. When they do that, it takes notes away from the scale. You can no longer play in a key of E flat or a key of B flat, for instance. And they call that diatonic tuning, same way a harmonica is tuned so that it only plays certain notes in the scale. Imagine a piano with no black keys. You only have certain notes. And when you've adjusted your Autoharp to a diatonic tuning, and you've got all these doubled strings. You've got your E string, your A string, your D string, and your G string doubled, say. Again, it gives a full, rich, wonderful sound. It also makes it easier to play melodies because you're more likely to hit the right note if half of the strings on your harp are doubled. But people with exceptionally good hearing complain that if your doubled strings aren't 100% in tune, if they're 2 or 3 cents off, they can tell, and it makes them crazy. And so the advantage of the fine tuners on a diatonic Autoharp is that you can get those double strings sounding as close to perfect unison as is humanly possible. I grew up tuning by ear, by the way. That was the only way you could tune in my day. Even piano tuners with their tuning forks more or less tuned by ear. If you owned a strobo tuner, which cost about as much as a compact car, you could tune electronically, but we didn't own strobo tuners in those days. So we tuned by ear. We tuned our guitars, we tuned our banjos, and we tuned our mandolins, and we tuned everything else known to mankind by ear, and nobody died. Fine tuners on a violin are critical because the strings are so short that with those friction fit pegs, sometimes it's impossible to get where you need to be. The same thing is true to some extent on an Autoharp because these are friction fit pegs in their own way. And it's sometimes it's hard to get it exactly where it needs to be. 99 people out of 100 who own Autoharps will never feel the need for fine tuners. People who do diatonic, people who play professionally, people who do recording, they will need them. And people with perfect pitch might want them too, because that can make them crazy. I already pulled most of the strings off. I'm going to pull the other strings off in a minute. But the other thing that I wanted to do before I completely finish this is I want to take all these guys off. It's not hard. By the way, when you're going to change strings on an Autoharp, or you need to take the strings off of an Autoharp, you saw me unscrewing each of these strings a few turns to kind of get it started. Never do what some people do and just cut the strings off and then put the new strings in and then tighten it down. You know why you don't do that? Because by the time you've got that string tuned up, tightened to where it needs to be, you will drive the tuning pins so far into the face of the instrument that it can never be adjusted again, and you have to use Herculean methods. Do you see these very tiny microscopic threads on this? That's what pulls them into the instrument. So I will be, I'm going to save those as well. The other things I'm going to save, obviously, are the bar that the fine tuners sit in. Let me pull that out right now. I bet that's where that other wire is going once I pull this out. When you go to install a fine tuner like this, it drops into the same slot that the regular anchor bar does on an Autoharp that doesn't have fine tuners. But it does screw down, and the advantage of that is that it doesn't tend to rise up out of its place like the anchor bars do on some newer Autoharps. One of the curses of currently manufactured Autoharps is that the anchor bar, which is not fastened down, will actually pull up. The strings will actually pull it this way, and it will pull slightly out of place to the point where it warps the face of the Autoharp. In fact, the 21 quarter I showed you earlier has that problem, and I'm going to have to go in and if I plan on that Autoharp ever being useful for anybody in this lifetime, I'm going to have to go in and drill some holes and screw it down so it doesn't rise up any further and ruin the face of the instrument. So it's not only this poor thing that suffers from bad design, but the modern Oscar Schmidts are all suffering from a design where the anchor bar isn't fastened down and they pull up and disturb the face of the instrument. One thing that I noticed as I pull the anchor bar up, so this anchor bar, by the way, it's steel. It's much heavier than the anchor bars that they put in the regular harps. It has screws so it doesn't get out of place and pull up like so. So that's a good thing. An Autoharp with fine tuners is not going to suffer from at least that particular problem. but it can suffer from other problems, as I've demonstrated with this. I'm going to save off the pins for your strap. These pins are what you can put your strap on if you want to use a strap when you're playing the Autoharp. I like to when I'm standing. It makes it easier to hold. So I'm going to save those, and I'm going to save these. Why would I bother saving these tuning pins? I mean, there are so many of them. Surely I'll never get in a situation where I'll need one. Well, guess what? Many of the newer Autoharps are coming with tuning pins that aren't quite the same spec as the tuning pins on the older Autoharps, and as a result, they can be loose from the factory. So if that's the case, I can take one of these pins, which, by the way, these have no rust on them at all. The strings have almost no rust. It breaks my heart to throw away a set of almost new strings, but I didn't really have a choice. Wasn't going to get these babies out of the slots without cutting those strings. It can be done, but it requires a ridiculous amount of work. Once again, this was a fine piece of furniture. It was a little over-engineered, but they don't make them like this anymore. It has not, since this instrument was created, it has not occurred to anybody that cutting halfway through the frame of an Autoharp to put fancy electronics into it was a good idea. Several other pickups have been manufactured by Oscar Schmidt. There are other companies that make pickups now. None of them make a big hole in the frame of the instrument. Somebody in the history of this instrument probably paid a great deal of money for it and just watched it fold in half as soon as it was out of warranty. So that'll be where I go with this. There'll be other Autoharps that I work on that have just been worn out, and they're really only good for salvaging the parts. I've even bought Autoharps just for the parts. I have a couple Appalachians, the original Appalachian I showed you with the wooden chord bars, where I could stand to adjust those chord bars. So I bought another harp that used the same chord bars, so I can borrow chord bars off of it. And it turned out, ironically, once I got it in my shop, I realized that instrument had pulled itself apart anyway, and so it wasn't long for this world. So the $12 or $15 I spent for it was justified. So I hope this makes sense to you. Once again, I apologize for showing you an autopsy of what should have been a top-of-the-line instrument back in the day, but it was just the design was just not there. When I got the anchor for the fine-tuning system completely out, I noticed a tiny little wire under there. So it turned out that the wire that was loose, that was hanging on from the electronics, that wire did go to the anchor bar as a ground. So that was something I kind of figured, but I couldn't see it at first, but I did notice it then just a few minutes ago. The other thing was I've taken off the fine-tuning system, and I've taken off the chord bars, and the rest of the parts aren't really that valuable, but it's worth noting that if you want to buy, let's say you have a harp that has come to you without maybe it has a complete set of strings, maybe the strings are good but doesn't have the chord bars, and you want to turn it into a 21 chord Autoharp, and you go to buy the chord bars and all the other pieces that go with it, the combs and the chord bar covers and so on, and the springs. If you decide to do that, a set of those will likely cost you between $150 and $200 to $225, depending on where you get them. A good used set will likely run you $150. So that's one thing. I've got $150 worth of parts off of this, one way or the other. But the other thing that's worth noting is that very few people are selling fine-tuning systems. The Daigle fine-tuning system is excellent. There are a couple others that are very good, and they don't tend to sell them separately. When you can come across a fine-tuning system that's sold separately, even an Oscar Schmidt one, which is very hard to find, is likely going to cost you $150 to $300, depending on where you find it. So in other words, I have a harp that frankly cost around $200 when I got it, and I've got about $300 worth of parts off of if I want to go that way. Now, I'll probably just wind up using these parts on other harps, but it does save me having to buy them, doesn't it? And once again, this poor baby was just ill-fated from the start. A big hole in the side. Who would have imagined that all of those piano wire strings stretched across an instrument like this would put so much pressure on it that cutting half the frame away would actually permanently damage the instrument. You can't really see it in any of the pictures, but not only has it warped, but it also has delaminated. So even if you were to, say, completely disassemble this and take the face off, it would still be a huge chore just to get this face back into some sort of flat position so you could start all over again. I just thought I'd share this. Once again, I usually tend to share very upbeat things. This one is not so upbeat, but it's worth pointing out. When you do look at used auto harps, some of them had design flaws built into them that you really need to know about. This one is one of the worst. And I hope that if nothing else, you learned something about the fine-tuning system and the other pieces that I discussed as I was taking this poor thing apart. And I hope that you have a wonderful experience with your own next auto harp, and I'll talk to you later.